My name is Shelby, and I work with Fusion International. This is a video on how to teach Fusion instrumental workshops. For the purposes of this video, I'll be focusing on how to teach keyboard, but the same principles can be applied to other instruments: electric guitar, acoustic guitar, bass, drums, or any instrument you might find yourself teaching in a Fusion setting. I'll also be focusing on how to teach a Fusion camp workshop, but those same principles can be applied to any workshop that happens any time of the year. A workshop is a setting in which Fusion students can learn musical skills in order to engage in dynamic community and to develop a basis for continued musical and relational growth. That's kind of a long definition, but notice how music and skills are always coupled with relationships and community. That's the main purpose of a Fusion workshop, that music is a tool to build relationships and ultimately to bring worship and glory to Christ. Here are 4 goals and purposes of a Fusion workshop. Number 1, a concert. You're always preparing your students to showcase what they've learned in a tangible way. Number 2, you want your workshop to be a springboard for further learning. This isn't just formal musical study. You want to equip your students with the tools and skills that they need to continue learning even when the workshop is over. 3, you want every student to feel that they're part of a group and also being taught as an individual. And finally, relationships. That's the ultimate goal of every Fusion workshop, that friendships are developed, not just between the teacher and the students, but between the students themselves, so that they can feel a sense of friendship and belonging and camaraderie with each other. What are some things a Fusion workshop is not? Well, it's not just to teach purely technical skills to your students. You don't want them to be musical robots. Rather, you want them to have an understanding of what they're learning and be able to apply it in practical ways in a Fusion context. It's also not solely task-oriented. Although you're teaching your students songs they can play in the concert, you want your workshop to be primarily relationally driven. And lastly, it's not just half-baked musical material that you should be imparting to your students. God-honoring excellence is vital. You do want to give your students a solid musical foundation. One basic concept you should teach your students is note recognition. On the keyboard, it's best to do this by using the black keys as reference points. For example, below every set of 2 black keys is the note C. You can quickly play a game with your students based on this information by asking them to find all the C's on their keyboard. Then, by expanding it to the rest of the musical alphabet. Probably the most important concept you'll teach your students is how to find and play major and minor chords. On a keyboard, this is best accomplished by counting, as the pattern is completely consistent for all major and minor chords. In order to find a major chord, you first find the name of that chord. So let's find C major. First you would find C, then count up 4 notes to find E, and from E count up 3 notes to find G. C, E, G, that's a major chord. So the pattern of counting 4, then 3 can find any major chord you need to play. It's the opposite for finding a minor chord. Let's find C minor. First count 3, and then count 4. The pattern is also consistent for finding any minor chord. By explaining this counting principle to your students, you can quickly teach them the information and have them play a game where they should be able to find any major or minor chord. Once the students learn how to find all major and minor chords, they can play basically any pop or rock song. Another important concept to work on with your students is playing by ear. A lot of Fusions don't use any sheet music at all, so the kids will have to figure out what to play through listening. I use some simple exercises to help them develop this skill. One thing I'll do is say, Put your thumb on C and play the simple pattern after me. Then I'll just play a 2 or 3 note pattern, for example, C, D, E. I think you'll find that most of your students have no problem playing by ear. And those that do improve dramatically in just a couple of days. Technique is not the focus of a Fusion workshop, but it's important to help your students learn to play correctly. Although you probably won't be spending a lot of time on scales and technical exercises, it's helpful to use some simple analogies in order to help them understand proper technique. On the keyboard, for example, I often like to say your hand should be shaped like a bird cage, just so you're not playing with completely flat or overly curved fingers. You don't have to spend much time on it, but a little bit of technical advice will go a long way. We've talked about notes, chords, and technique, but of course another important musical element is rhythm. Thankfully, in most pop and rock songs, this is really simple to teach because they're all in 4/4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, over and over again. If students are having trouble understanding this, it's often helpful for them to listen closely to the bass or drums in the recording. It can also be helpful to write in the counts in their camp book or whatever music they're using. Please feel free to be creative and adjust for your workshop. Some teachers like introducing a lot of structure, including worksheets and exercises. It really just depends on who's in your workshop and what they want to learn. No matter what, you're going to have to be flexible and willing to adapt. Obviously, teaching keyboard looks a little different than teaching guitar, bass, and drums, but many of the same principles apply. On guitar, for example, the pattern of finding major and minor chords is not as consistent across the board, so you might want to just start by teaching 2 or 3 basic chords and playing some games, doing some exercises based on those. Similarly, for bass, it's not as important to teach chords, but just notes and the hand positions that go along with them, and you can drill those and play games based off of just the notes themselves. For drums, you don't have to deal as much with notes or harmony, it's mostly just rhythm. But you can still break everything down and play games based on the different drums or different rhythmic patterns. The most important thing is that the kids understand why they're playing something, how it's relevant in a musical context, so they're not just spitting out notes like a machine. Know the songs and parts you're teaching well enough to be able to quickly adjust them for different levels. You may have to simplify a part, especially as the week goes on, if a student isn't getting it. Conversely, you may have to creatively expand a part if a student is getting bored. The better you know the songs, the more flexible you'll be able to be. In many cases, often excluding bass and drums, it's not necessary to teach your student to play during the whole song. In fact, it's much better if they can play a simple, meaningful part during just a section of the song. I'm going to demonstrate for you a simple, meaningful string part for the U2 song Pride. In this case, it's only played during the chorus, but it gives the student something meaningful to add to the song. It's important to communicate well and to coordinate with the other workshop leaders to make sure your students aren't doubling up on parts or playing unnecessary parts in a song. It's important that every student in your workshop is occupied at all times, even if your attention is being specifically focused on one person. Sometimes this can be a little bit trickier if not all the students have their own instrument to practice on, for example, in the drum workshop. However, it's still possible. At the very least, the student can be listening to the recording and thinking about what they need to play, or perhaps practicing some rhythmic exercises away from the instrument. It's just important that they stay engaged, not just sitting there twiddling their thumbs while you're working with someone else.
Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7,
try to use specifics to teach general information. For example, explain to the student why they're playing that particular guitar riff. Does it belong in this particular chord or scale? You can branch off into all sorts of musical topics quite easily and quickly by using the specific information to talk about what's generally going on. Here's a brief layout of a week at Fusion Camp and what your workshop could look like. On day 1, you need to start with a name game or some other introductory activity so that the students can start getting to know each other and getting to know you. You also want to find out what previous musical experience they have had. Next, you should go ahead and introduce the concert songs to your students. It's important that they go ahead and start listening to the songs and even pick which ones they want to learn. Next, you should have some teaching time where you present some musical material and then play a game. And lastly, you should go ahead and start working on the concert songs. Even though it's only day 1, it's important to start this process as quickly as possible. Usually it's best to start by focusing on the chorus or other important part of the song. On day 2, I would recommend having another teaching time and then playing another music game. Next, focusing on the concert songs again. At this point, believe it or not, by day 2, students should already be able to mostly play the chorus and should be moving on to other parts of the song. Lastly, you should mention Talent Night to your workshop. Talent Night happens towards the end of the week at Fusion Camp. It is a great place for you and your workshop to showcase a piece or project you've put together. For example, you could have a lot of different keyboards playing different sounds, or a similar idea with a lot of guitars or drums. Really, the sky's the limit. No matter what you do, Talent Night is a great opportunity for you to bond with your students in creating something together. On day 3, it's up to you whether or not you start with a teaching time and musical game. It depends on where the students are in learning their concert songs. By day 3, they should be able to comfortably play the chorus and should be moving on to the overall form of the song. Make sure that every student has a way to practice along with the recording so that they're better prepared to play with a live band. Also, continue working on your project for Talent Night. On day 4, your focus is on preparing your students to play with the band. Band rehearsals usually start around day 5. Also, continue working on your Talent Night project. On days 5 and 6, your students will be spending time rehearsing with their bands. So the focus of your workshop should be on perfecting the concert songs and helping them feel comfortable with what they're playing. Some of your students may have already mastered the songs they're playing for the concert, so be prepared to introduce new musical material if necessary. Also, finalize your Talent Night project. Here are some tips to make your workshop fun and effective. You're working with teenagers, so they're really fast learners. Even though a lot of them are beginners, I think you'll be surprised at how quickly they can master new musical material. Know the concert songs inside and out in order to effectively help your students. Even if you have some part in mind, you may have to adjust it quickly depending on how fast your student is learning it. Remember that perfection is not the goal of your workshop, but at the same time you want your students to feel successful. You want to challenge them, but also give them something they can play confidently and well. Don't force anyone to play in the concert if they don't want to, but encourage them until the bitter end. They can do it. Offer more options for advanced students. Some of your students may be bored by the material you're presenting or by the concert songs, so expand out of that. Ask them what they want to learn. Spend some time with your students outside of the workshop setting. This is a group you can focus on when it comes to building relationships. Don't be afraid to ask big questions in your workshop. You don't have to over-spiritualize things, but some workshop leaders have done an amazing job initiating spiritual discussions and seeing huge results. Remember that music is a language, but don't stop there. Let it be a foundation for relationships, discussions, friendship, and trust.